I'm Bryan Hartson, and welcome to the Bryan Hartson Show. Today I'm in my red shirt with my ho-ho-ho tie because today is July 1st and it is the first day of Christmas in July, one of the best holidays, I think, and so I thought I'd share that with you a little bit today. Now today we've got a great show on the Bryan Hartson Show. We have Eleanor Ward. Eleanor Ward is an international inspirational speaker, an author, a fresh start coach for women to start their lives anew. Now, she is committed to empowering and equipping women with the tools to start over after a trauma or devastating loss and to take their lives back. Now, unfortunately, she lost her husband and her son 15 years ago in a tragic car accident. She spiraled deep into grief. And after failed attempts with traditional health care to help her through her grief, she created her own grief management program and now helps people through coaching them through their grief. She's also developed a separate trauma program. So let's go ahead and learn about Eleanor's journey and where she is today. Come on, let's go. Hello and welcome to the Bryan Hartson Show. I'm Bryan Hartson, and as promised, I have Eleanor Ward with us, who has a very compelling story to tell us. Hi, Eleanor. Thank you for joining us today.
Hi, how are you?
Doing wonderful. Eleanor, you have a very interesting story to tell us that's pretty impactful. I think our people are going to want to hear about your story, where you came from, what the darkness was, and how you found the light. So why don't you bring us up to speed a little bit?
Basically, I was just a Midwest hometown girl married to the local firefighter, had two kids, and I have always been the crazy dreamer. I've always had 5,000 businesses running out of the house, and he's always been the breadwinner. And so um, I wanted to move. I wanted to get somewhere where I could reach more of my dreams. And my husband was always greatly accommodating in that way. And so
Uh-huh.
when we left to move, uh, he wanted to leave a day early, and I kept saying, "I don't think we should." Something was nagging at me that we shouldn't leave, and unfortunately, I was right. We all left together, him, me, and my two sons, and he and my oldest son were killed in the car accident. We were all together,
Wow.
and so I got blamed by a lot of people for saying, if he wasn't trying to make you happy, it wouldn't have happened. Because my husband was like this super charismatic dude, if you knew him, and everybody loved him. And my oldest had the same vibe about him. And so it was like I just felt like I'm not a good parent. He needs his dad more than he needs me. We've had a lot of ups and downs, and I lost every friend I ever had when they
Mm.
passed. And it was so many people that were heartbroken. And for whatever reason, it felt like they thought what happened to me was inadvertently going to happen to them. And I was like, grief is not a virus. You don't catch it. I
Right, right.
mean, death doesn't just jump around to various people. This is not final destination. And so I didn't have a lot of support even with my family, and so I was left out in the cold at the time with this poor 11-year-old looking at me with these big doe eyes like, what's our next move?
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking, kid, I don't know, because everything I was going for, I went the opposite way. Instead of going for what we were moving towards, which was having a winery, starting a new business, and all the other things, even me trying to be a stand-up comedian, I dumped all of it in trash can and said,
Wow.
okay, I gotta go get a 9 to 5. So let me tell everybody here, I haven't failed for 15 years at 9 to 5. I'm the worst employee on the planet. And so none of those worked. And finally, about 3 years ago, I told my son, I will try to keep working, but I got to get back to what I can do. And God kind of put on my heart and said, you need to help people with grief, because I was going to counselors. I was doing alternative therapy. As I was with my son and stuff, I was going to groups. Nothing was working. And I finally said, okay, you can't get over grief. That doesn't work. I was with this man for 20 years. My oldest son was 14. My youngest was 11 at the time. My youngest is 25 now. You can't just get over a whole life with people. And unfortunately, in America, we push that down everybody's throat. You got 3 to 5 days to bury him, get back to work, sit here 8 hours a day, and act like nothing has happened in your life.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that was destroying me. I was already a horrible employee, but it was destroying me. Having to sit there every day, and all I could think about was what else I could be doing. I could be inventing something. I could be mystery shopping. I could be over here doing this, because I was always doing stuff. I could be online selling textbooks, all kind of stuff that I did. I didn't care anything but sitting somewhere, because it made me feel like there was shackles. So when you add grief on top of that and unhappiness, it was just like nervous breakdown was coming right on down the pipe. And so basically, once I started thinking about that, I said, what else can I do to help myself and my son? We weren't communicating. We were in the same house, but we had two different types of grief. He lost a father and a brother. I lost a husband and a son. Totally different types of grief, but we live in the same house. That's nuts. So I'm thinking, they tell you to grieve together, but if your grief is totally different, it doesn't work. So finally, I sat down with him and I said, what would help you? He said, I don't want reminders all the time. I know my dad and my brother are gone. He said, I don't need anniversaries. I don't need that stuff. I know their birth months and all that stuff. I would just rather kind of go on with my day. And if I feel like talking about it, I will. That opened a whole pathway of communication with me and my son. I didn't have to try to force anything down his throat. And honestly, I was thankful, because I felt like a lot of that was forced. This anniversary, that anniversary, whatever would happen. And then for me, I said, well, I will respect that. And now he does talk more about his dad and his brother. And for me, I said, well, how do I manage this? So I literally started just writing. I'm a big writer, writing everything down that I could about how to manage your grief. And then I kept eliminating what didn't work. And I came up with a 6, 8, and 12-week program that each one is an intro. The first one's an intro to your grief. The second one is learning about your grief and where you are. And then the last piece is managing your grief. And I've done it with a few clients. It works. I've done it with myself, and it opened me up to be able to function again. I can talk about them now without blubbering everywhere. I can function. I'm reaching my dreams again. I'm getting things done. So it was a change. And trauma, as far as me doing trauma, I say trauma is separate, because trauma comes from a variety of things, and trauma even comes from grief. So for me, I was like, we got to put trauma over here by itself, because it's a whole nother beast. And so I work with people separately on the trauma, and sometimes it's mingled in, and that's okay too. But people have a right to say, I need some help, and stop trying to get over it. You aren't going to get over somebody you loved. And like you said, you don't know what it's like to lose a spouse. I don't know what it's like to lose a sibling, So with my son, I had to start to understand where his type of grief was. He lost his whole family in an instant. So,
yeah. So part of what you talk about is that when you have grief, when you have lost a son, a husband, a loved one, that grief does not go away, but you manage through it. So how does that work for you? How does that work for you, and how does that work for the people that you speak with?
well, first I find out where they are in their grief. For me, it took me almost 13 years in, and they've been gone 15, I say maybe 12 years in. And so I kind of find out where you are. Is this brand spanking new? Is it been a while? And have you been living in it? You can be living in your grief. And for me, I was living in my grief. So I had to come to understand, what triggers me? When does the trigger happen? Why do I feel this way today? So if I woke up and maybe I wasn't looking at dates, and I'm just like, oh, I'm crying and I don't understand. I'll stop and say, what is today? And we'll take this year for instance. In March, my son's birthday is March the 10th. Around the 15th, I was just a boohooing mess, and I thought, what is going on? His birthday's passed. I'm fine. It doesn't matter. It's still in the context of that month, that time he was born, and he's not here. It just hit me at a different date. So I came to understand dates were important. When you will feel up, when you will feel down. I came to understand what would trigger those things, and I started managing them. What does that mean? I started writing things down, and I have like a highlighted grief type journal, which I'm going to be making for my clients soon, where it's kind of like I can say, okay, today in this month is where we may have went on this type of big family trip because we were always going and doing things. So that may
Hmm.
they may bring up some memories. You don't have to look at anything to make yourself feel this way. You just have to understand what may trigger the grief to overtake you that day. And now I can say to my son, I'm not having a good day. Doesn't mean I'm going to cry all day. Doesn't mean it's going to be awful. I just know I have to manage my emotions, and I don't want to take it out on anyone else. So I try to get my clients to understand what your triggers are in your grief, where you are in your grief. You know, you might be brand new in your grief, so you don't need people telling you. Like, I was months in my grief early on, and people were telling me, you're going to get married again. I wasn't thinking about marriage a few months after losing a 20-year marriage. Come on.
Right, right, right. That's crazy.
So once you kind of understand factors in your life that connect you to the person you lost, then you can begin to manage it. I know someone that um, they go out and do the balloon every year. If the anniversary helps you, that's wonderful. But if the anniversary triggers you to kind of go down a pipe hole, managing that would say, well, what else can I do besides sit in the house, wait for it to overtake me, and take me to a bad place? What you can say is, I could go for a drive instead today. I can go to a paint and sip today. Managing it means more than just talking to yourself. It means you have actual plans to push yourself past how you're feeling.
So now you're talking about trigger points, and so a trigger point can be a positive or it can be a negative. In your case, that month was a negative through the entire month, even though you didn't realize it until after the fact. You're like, I feel like, you know what? Oh, it's because this is the month birthday. So that would be a negative trigger point. Are there positive trigger points?
Well, it can all of them can be positive. It's just in my mind, it was kind of like, oh my God, this was when he was born. And instead of flipping it, which I do teach my clients, flip it and saying, oh, March is wonderful. March is great. I had my son this month. What can I do to think wonderfully about him, positively about him? Um, and so I ended up flipping it negatively. And sometimes, no matter how hard you want to, you can't flip it. So I went on with that month, and I just let the rest of it let me cry it on out because obviously that's what I needed to do. And I was okay when my husband's birthday came up. I was okay with other things. So you can take any. I tell people all the time, it's really a mindset training to constantly tell yourself, we had an amazing time. We did wonderful things, and that way you can kind of really start to control how you're feeling. But I also tell them there will be times, no matter what you do to manage the grief, you've got to go with the tears because obviously your body needs to let it out.
Hmm. Yeah, definitely. I can totally see that. Eleanor, we're going to take a break real quick. When we come back, I want to talk to you about trauma. Okay?
Okay.
We'll be right back.
Hi, this is Philip with Trinity Teas, and we're at the Old Town Temecula Farmers Market in Temecula, California, Saturdays 8 to 12:30 p.m. And we're talking about our teas. And the golden milk is all anti-inflammatory. It's ginger, turmeric, and cinnamon, sampled in a vanilla almond milk. Extremely anti-inflammatory. We sample it in the vanilla almond milk, no dairy, no caffeine, and we make it taste like a Mexican drink called horchata. If you haven't tried that before, it reminds people of like a cinnamon toast cereal or a nice dessert drink. So come and check us out at the Farmers Market in Old Town Temecula, Saturdays 8 to 12:30. Have a good day.
And we're back on the Bryan Hartson Show with Eleanor. And Eleanor Ward is telling us about her grief and trauma programs that she has created as a result of going through some trauma herself. Um, I've got a website it's actually a Facebook page. I'm just popping that up right now. And that's www.facebook.com, Bigger Fish to Fry Coaching. Or if you just want to take out your phone and click on that QR code right there, that'll bop you right on over to Eleanor's page. And Eleanor, we're in the middle of talking about the grief and such that you've had to go through, but what's more importantly, how you're coming out of that grief and how you're changing not only your life but other people's lives as well. And we spent a good deal of time talking about grief and grief management. I'm sure we could spend a lot more time talking about it, but I want to move and talk about trauma a little bit as well, because that's important. And I think right now, with us dealing with the COVID isolation and the virus and everything that's been going on the past year and a half, to me, that sort of sounds like it's down your wheel well of managing trauma, because I think this is a trauma for a lot of people, a way of changing their lives and having it impacted from being able to travel, to be able to see people in public, to be able to hug your loved ones, your grandmas, your grandpas, not being able to see them for months. And while we may be on the downside of the virus right now, who knows, uptaking another one, I don't know. But let's just hope that we're on the downside of the tick. How are people going to use you and your trauma program in order to come out of the catastrophe of the last year and a half?
Well, the one thing I've decided to do, my trauma program was 12 weeks, and I've decided to extend it to 6 months. And I know that sounds crazy,
Wow.
but I lost my mom in COVID. I never got to see my mom again. And
Wow.
I remember
Sorry to hear
people
that.
telling me, oh, thank you. I remember people telling me, oh, nothing would keep me from my mama. I'd get there. Well, let's see. My mom didn't die in the middle of COVID. She literally died when they locked everything down that March. She died that month. You could not travel by car. You could not fly. You could not do anything. So I said, well, I kind of don't have enough strength to fight the National Guard across borders. I kind of can't get on an airplane. It's not that I'm without love for my mother. I can't fight the military to get to her. So there are so many people. Maybe their mom didn't die that March COVID shut down, but their mom died in the hospital and they never saw their parent or child or loved one again. And there are so many rules people don't know about COVID. You have X amount of days to get the family member, buried or put away, because they don't want the COVID bodies to stay longer than 7 days. You can only have them in the funeral home for so many days before the funeral home says, due to it being a pandemic viral condition, they got to get out of here. There are so many things that are not being quietly talked about, Bryan, with COVID. And so people are traumatized behind this stuff, because you're like, well, I'm waiting for Sally Sue Who to fly in to get to mom that died of complications of COVID. And so even though they say it's not COVID, a complication of COVID is still COVID, and it's still treated as such. So there are so many facets with that. I said, we need to change that for people that have had COVID related traumas, because traumas start
Right.
from any place. Usually trauma lasts for a long time. Childhood traumas that are related to, things in your childhood can be a number of years, and then you grow up, but you kind of shove those down, and that's how you deal with them. And, so to me, a 12-week program works for that. But when you're talking about a change of life where you can't leave, you're getting divorced because you realize you haven't liked your spouse for 10 years anyway. Your kids are like, what in the world is happening? Everything's changing just because of COVID. You got people going broke. You have people who had amazing lives that now have nothing. At the end of the day, COVID really took us into spaces and places we've never been before. So, I definitely am making a better program for people that are connected to that, because we are again ignoring what COVID has done. We're working from home. We're telling people to go from working to home to come back into a field a year and a half later. They've gained weight. They have issues. They're divorced now. They don't have childcare because the schools are closed. it's really kind of bananas. And we're just ignoring all those traumas. So I'm here to work on that program. And I want people to know it's okay to say, I have COVID related trauma. I have things that I know would not have happened in my life had I not been going through COVID.
And I know that for you, one of your struggles is your self-worth and saying, I can do whatever it is I set my mind to do. And that's something that you've had to overcome in order to develop these programs and get them out to people that really need the help, right?
It is. I really fought with that mindset that I wasn't good enough. And it's weird because that was never me until I lost my husband and my son. And I became this totally insecure, weird chick that I didn't even know who she was. I'm like, who are you? And I remember I saw a friend from high school a few years ago, and he said, I don't like you now. He said, I loved you in high school. You were Fielders. You were Oprah. You were the bomb. He was like, all you do is cry. And I was, at that time, I wasn't in that space. I was just like, oh, he's right. And I had to actually kind of find myself again and say, you know what? You've always been here. I just had to bring her back out.
Awesome. And it looks like she's coming out quite well, too, might I add. You got a great personality. I absolutely love our time together here right now. Eleanor,
thank you.
Give our listeners and viewers 3 things to look for in trauma, with self-realization that they have had trauma. 3 things to look for, and what can they do to get out of it?
Number 1, change in behavior. The person goes from whatever their personality was to a total different entity. Let's say they were really outgoing, fun, playful, and they're withdrawn and they're quiet all the time. And now they're watching TV and that's not something they did. That's a behavior change. It could be the opposite. They could be introvert and go into this extreme extrovert. They're both ways of trying to get someone to know something's wrong without talking about it. So that's number 1. Look for those personality changes. Number 2, listen to what people say. You would be surprised how much people actually interject what has happened to them in their trauma all day, every day, and you don't catch it. They'll say little things. They'll mention the whole trauma in a quick conversation, and you may miss it because you're not paying attention. Pay attention and listen, because most of the time, I don't know a person who has trauma that will not at some point actually say the trauma out loud. Trauma is really never secret, contrary to popular belief. Number 3, withdrawing from life. They're done. They don't want to be here. They slowly start doing all those things that we think are cliche. They're throwing out clothes. They're giving stuff away. They're not eating very much. They're not doing what they normally do. They're not going to church. They're not going to school or work. They're calling off all the time. And they don't care about consequences. People always think that necessarily means suicide. It doesn't always mean that. Honestly, you can shut down to the point where you're still alive, but you're just sitting in your home and you just don't deal with people. And then you look up and the person's withdrawn from life. And then they're getting meals delivered. They're not talking to people. So I would say those are the big 3. You gotta, pay attention to behavioral changes. You have to pay attention to what people are saying. And then you definitely have to look at if they are withdrawing, because the withdrawing can lead to the suicide.
My goodness, and you just, I didn't realize, but you just touched on things about getting your food delivered, because today, since the pandemic hit, that's the thing to do. You get your food delivered, and that could actually be a sign that you need help.
It really can be. And people think it's, well, you almost have to. Nobody's open very long. It's the pandemic. I don't want to go here. I don't want to go there. But as the world is opening back up, why not take a drive and go pick up your food? It's not going to kill you because you got curbside pickup, but you have to look at people that are getting literally like every single meal delivered. Their car doesn't move anymore. They don't leave the house. And the work from home epidemic we are having now, wow, it's amazing for some people. It's actually handicapping other people that can't function without being out in the world every day. For me, I love it. My house is my house. I'm gonna do what I gotta do to be in my house. But I'm a different breed. Someone else, for them, this is suffocating, being in their house all day. This is overwhelming, and they don't know how to function that way. And you may not get another regular job. People are shocked when I say that. I'm like, even though the world's opening back up, a lot of those companies took this opportunity to say, I don't have to pay for a building. You can keep working from home. I don't have to worry so much about as much health care. You're not around each other as much. So a lot of the companies are taking advantage of letting you stay at home, regardless of the consequences. And a lot of people are falling down like, oh my God, this is not what I thought it was going to be being at home all day.
Wow. That's some powerful stuff you've talked about today. I appreciate you being on the show today and sharing your journey. And it's great to see your personality out. It's a great personality. And I don't know, maybe you should take up a little bit of that stand up in your free time.
I used to hear that all the time from my students when I taught college. I've done a little bit of everything in the secular world.
Well,
Oh,
again,
but
thanks, Eleanor, for being on the show. I really appreciate it.
thank you so much.
All right. And ladies and gentlemen, that is going to wrap us up for another edition of the Bryan Hartson Show. Glad that you're with us. I'm glad that you're taking the time to watch our broadcasts. Remember, today is the first day of the rest of your life. Make this moment count. We'll see you next time.